Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. In the last few weeks, much of the news coverage, both nationally and here in Vermont, has been focused on immigration enforcement disrupting our communities and businesses. And while I believe those who are here illegally and are committing serious crimes should be detained, I don't believe we should be targeting those who are here peacefully because they're our neighbors and friends, have kids in our schools, shop at our businesses, and play an important role in our economy and workforce. I do think a path forward for Vermont that we could all get behind is one that is to advocate to Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform, like expanding the guest worker program to allow pathways to citizenship and greater opportunities for those working hard to make a living and trying to take care of their families rather than being forced to live in the shadows. I believe we should all strive to make Vermont and our country a more welcoming place for those who are seeking a better life and greater opportunities. With all that said, simultaneously, we must focus on what's happening right here in this building. Last November, we saw a record voter turnout with over 70% of Vermonters going to the polls. And as a result, they sent a clear message. It's too expensive to live here. Taxes, fees, and policies coming out of Montpelier are unbearable and pricing some out of Vermont completely. They want policies that make Vermont more affordable, not less. They want us to fix the underlying issues, not just fund them. They called for balance and asked legislators to work with me to find common ground, not just override my vetoes or play partisan politics like we see in Washington. And I believe Vermonters are right. We need to use the legislative session to address what's within our control, rather than falling into the trap, getting so distracted by DC turmoil that we forget the problems voters elected us to fix. Because the fact is, the legislature typically adjourns in May, which is right around the corner. And while the legislature has addressed a few things I put forward, many of our proposals, including regulatory reform and the budget, haven't been, despite our efforts to ask legislators to find compromise with us. Now, I never expect the budget delivered to me at the end of the session will be rubber stamped and look like the budget I presented in January. I can only wish that. But I do expect, and Vermonters expect, that legislators will work with us to find common ground. Instead, I'm concerned the legislature is looking to, for example, cut funding for much-needed housing, substance abuse treatment and prevention, and brownfields, all while spending more in other areas like an additional $10 million over what I asked for and what's known as the hotel motel program. And in fact, the legislature overall spends tens of millions more in the budget than we recommended. Secretary Clark will go into more detail, but I want to be clear. There's still time to make improvements. So I'm hopeful the legislature will listen to Vermonters, work with me and my team, and deliver a budget I can sign. With that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Clark.
I'm proud to have worked for over 20 years in state government, most of which was spent working on the budget in multiple administrations, as well as in the legislature's Joint Fiscal Office. So I know how hard this work is, and I appreciate the time and energy put in by the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. I also appreciate having found some areas of common ground, especially for a $77 million general fund transfer to the Education Fund to help stabilize statewide property taxes. It is important to note, however, that this $77 million was proposed as a bridge to hold property taxpayers harmless while we begin a public education transformation to make the system more equitable, higher quality, and financially sustainable. Without making changes in our governance and funding formula, this money will not do what it is intended to do. While many of the governor's initiatives were funded, the current version of the Senate budget increases general fund base spending by $50 million and adds new positions that create future obligations. Considering uncertainty at the federal level and the economic outlook, we need to be more cautious in base funding commitments, because once we put something into base, we're responsible for it every year. Next, we have concerns about cuts to our housing package. The governor's proposed budget made strategic investments that worked together to fix structural issues and address root causes that contribute to homelessness. The Vermont Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, has a big return in this area. It is one of the lowest cost and fastest tools for bringing new affordable units online. Despite that, the Senate version of the budget shifts $4 million in base funding to one time, taking future funding off the table that we know puts more Vermonters in permanent homes faster. The Senate budget also cuts $16.5 million from the Missing Middle Home Ownership Development Program and the Rental Revolving Loan Fund Program. Collectively, these cuts mean fewer homes for workers and families. I do want to thank the committee, however, for restoring the House's cut to the Vermont Bond Bank Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. Vermonters have been clear that affordability is a top priority. The governor's budget proposed $13.5 million in much-needed targeted tax relief. This package included 4 initiatives: a military pension exemption, expanding the child tax credit, increasing the earned income tax credit to 100%, and increasing the income-eligible limits for the Social Security tax exemption. These proposals are targeted directly to the people who need it: young families, lower-income working Vermonters, and seniors on a fixed income. And military pension exemptions are necessary to keep and attract more military retirees, most of whom are at prime working age. Instead of funding the expansion of these existing, easy-to-implement credits targeted to those who need it most, the Senate budget contemplates a new program. Vermonters need relief now, so we should direct it simply and strategically as the governor proposed. Investments in substance use recovery and treatment were also cut. This means at the same time the budget invests less in housing, it also weakens our ability to address substance use as a root cause of homelessness. The current version of the budget removes startup and base funding for intensive recovery housing, and it cuts a proposed base appropriation to support 4 aftercare positions for residential treatment and recovery providers. This package was designed to address gaps in our current recovery and treatment system. Without them, we can't take this innovative approach to do better for Vermonters. I outlined each of these concerns in a letter to Senate Appropriations weeks ago. A small number of them were addressed, most notably the restoration of funding for PCB mitigation and remediation in Priority 1 and 2 schools. But the governor's concerns went largely unaddressed, and several new proposals were added that are not in line with Vermonters' priorities. Despite the disagreements, I remain optimistic that we can produce a budget that works for Vermonters at a price they can afford. I look forward to working with the legislature to accomplish this.
Thank you, Secretary. We'll now open up to questions.
Governor, you mentioned, you alluded to the incident in Franklin County with the farm workers that were detained by Border Patrol. What more do you know of the situation? How the chain of events went? Are you in contact with Border Patrol? What do we know about it?
Yeah, I probably don't have any more information than you already have. From my standpoint, it sounded like someone had called Border Patrol about two individuals possibly crossing the border. They went to investigate, found two people coming out of the woods, I believe. But with the background, those were farm workers that were working in the sugar woods with blaze green on and backpacks. So anyhow, they went to talk with those two individuals, and one of them ran, and that was probably the biggest mistake. So at that point, they had no choice but to apprehend them, which they did, but it led to others on the farm. So I think it was unfortunate the way it all turned out, but I don't blame Border Patrol for any of it. They were just doing their jobs.
Does this represent a policy shift, do you think, from the Trump administration, or is this sort of a one-off?
You know, I don't think. I've been thinking about this, and if this had happened 4 years ago under the Biden administration, I think it would have been the same. I think they have a job to do, and I don't think this is when they arrived at the farm with two people. I think there were two Border Patrol folks, but I don't think that was their intention. So I think the same thing probably would have happened.
So you don't think that this incident signals the next wave of more coordinated strategy by the administration?
I'm not sure that it does. I haven't heard that it does, but it could trigger it. I just don't know, and none of us know at this point.
There's a significant amount of fear, I think, in the dairy community in particular. I know there were several farmers we spoke with who were worried that their staffs might not return in the levels that they need them to in order to milk these cows. Can you speak a little bit to whether those fears are justified and what the impact could be on the dairy industry in the state if we have acute staffing shortage due to this?
Yeah, obviously it will have a tremendous impact on farms here in Vermont, dairy farms. They rely on this population to work there. I know that there are many farmers who have tried to hire from within, Vermonters, and taking extraordinary steps to do so. And it's not as though, from what I understand from a couple of farmers, their starting wage is about $16 an hour, but they have housing on top of that's included. So it's not as though it's minimum wage. It's over minimum wage with some benefits and some bonuses as well on top of that. So, but for those who I spoke with, they didn't get a single applicant. I've talked a lot about our workforce shortage here. I've talked a lot about the need for attracting more people to the state. We just don't have the people who want to do this type of work. So it would have a tremendous impact on the dairy industry. So we're watching to see what might happen next, but we hope that we can continue while we advocate for Congress. And again, I think this is an area where we all can get behind in this building. The extreme right, extreme left should be able to get on board with some sort of process that allows an expansion of the guest worker program. And it's not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This has been, you look over the last few decades and there's been proposals to do just that. I think in 2013, I think there was the Gang of Eight. Marco Rubio was part of that came up with a solution that would have helped tremendously, but it was scuttled for probably political reasons. There was another proposal, I think recently, in last year's Congress, that would have helped as well, bipartisan support, but that was scuttled for political reasons. So again, all we need to do is resurrect one or two of those initiatives and put it into place, because we're not the only state who's impacted. We're not the only, we're a blue state, but there are many, many red states out there who are going to be facing the same issue if they decide to increase enforcement.
Can you speak to why it is that this country has a seasonal worker program where workers come in from other countries to help during the harvest, but we don't have something that helps the dairy industry, which is nonstop, 24/7?
Yeah, I think, again, I think we should have a guest worker program. So, but I think that was introduced at some point, and it was seasonal, so it's temporary in nature, and so I think people bought into that. But it's proven itself to be highly effective, and again, an expansion in this area I think would be advantageous to the state, advantageous to the workers, advantageous to the farms. It's a win-win-win for everyone, I think, because we have a shortage of workers across the country. It's not just Vermont, but it's extreme here.
Is there anything the state can do absent federal?
I don't know what. I'm all ears, but I don't know what it is.
Governor, I wonder if either you or perhaps Secretary Tebbets would have some insight as to, after they were pursued into the barn, why the arrests happened, what, or detainments or whatever you can call
I
them.
don't know if Secretary Tebbets could even answer that one. I can't either. That's probably a better question for them, or maybe someone that was there. I think, again, from my perspective, again, as I've thought about this, somebody ran, the two individuals, they went to talk with them, one of them ran, they had to apprehend, they had no choice. They ran towards the barn possibly, into there, and I think that might be where the housing is as well, so it's all intermingled. So I don't know if they had any choice but to do what they did.
Sort of sounds, in a way, like the secondary thing where you make a traffic stop for something maybe minor or whatever, and then you find someone in the car who has a warrant out for their arrest, and then they are subsequently arrested. I just wonder if maybe that's what was happening here.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. And again, there's a lot of apprehension out there amongst the farm workers and the farms and so forth. So the two that they were approaching didn't know what to expect, right? So the knee-jerk reaction was to run. And maybe 4 years ago that wouldn't have happened. We weren't at this high level of anxiety that we are today.
Governor, the Vermont Care Board says hospitals need to find $200 million in cost-cutting measures or savings by July to keep Blue Cross Blue Shield's rate of increase for insurance premiums at 5%. $200 million to keep that at 5%. What is your assessment of what needs to happen right now in our healthcare system to avoid some of these increases?
Again, I think this is a great conversation for the Vermont Care Board to have with the hospitals. They know best what they can do. I know Mike Smith is working with them as well. I have a great deal of faith in him. And we'll learn more as this process continues.
They said this morning as well that with potential cuts to the federal government, or to federal subsidies, that is, we could be looking at a 25, maybe more % increase in premiums. Yeah. What would that mean for Vermonters?
Well, again, I don't want to get into the what ifs because we haven't seen what is going to happen. Like, we don't know for sure that there's going to be cuts, but we'll have to address them as they come.
There's a bill in the House right now that attempts to respond to some real urgent concerns among some businesses about the impact of the clean truck rule that's going to be going into effect. I'm wondering how do you feel about that proposal?
Yeah, no, I think there's a great need for some relief there. I've spoken to Secretary Moore about this as well. There's been other states. I think Maryland has taken action. Mass is, if they haven't already, they're going to. There's other states that are being impacted. So I think we have to slow this process down because it could have an effect on businesses and across the country. But for us, it's difficult with this kind of mandate. So Secretary Moore is here. Maybe she could add a bit to that.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. I am working with my counterparts in the other states that have signed on to California's advanced clean truck regulations. I think the challenges we're seeing in terms of market readiness aren't limited to Vermont. We have some tools, but also understand that the California Air Resources Board is looking at these rules too. And so we'll continue to track that progress and try to coordinate our efforts as best as possible, recognizing that there are some challenges and manufacturers will benefit most from a consistent approach for all the participating states.
You, as I understand it, have unilateral authority to press the pause button. So why not do that now?
Well, we could, and that's still, a tool we might be able to utilize. What we want, we want some buy-in from the legislature. This was something that somebody put forward, and we think there's great merit in having the conversation so that everyone understands the issue. Like, we're not trying to roll anything back. We're just trying to push pause until everyone can catch up.
So if this legislation hits a roadblock, you'll be there as a backstop?
I would be very much considering doing something to provide relief.
And to what extent does that risk putting Vermont even further behind its statutory goals to reduce emissions?
Well, you mean with the Global Warming Solutions Act? Yeah. I mean, we open ourselves up to another lawsuit. And, I mean, again, that's what I've been highlighting, that's why it's problematic to have a private right of action, and so we're opening ourselves up to another lawsuit.
Governor, if I could add there just one point of information. Some of these larger trucks, frankly, don't exist right now, and that is really the challenge. This includes things like snow plows and street sweepers, so some pretty critical municipal equipment. And the only way to meet the ratios expected under clean trucks would just be to allow fewer internal combustion engine vehicles to be sold, because there is such a finite and short supply of electric vehicles for some of those larger, heavier duty uses.
And the last question, clean car is not without concern as well. Is that something you would consider?
Oh, I think we'll
well?
take one step at a time. I think this is the highest level of concern at this point.
The Senate has also advanced a data privacy bill, from what I understand, that does not have a private right of action. That was one of your concerns that you outlined last year. What's your sense? What is your feeling on the data privacy?
I haven't seen the latest version of that, but obviously we want to find a path forward. I don't know if Denise is on. Is she working on that? Do we know? Don't know. We'll get back to you on that. I just don't have the latest and greatest.
Yes, I am on.
Denise, do you have any information on that?
We are working on that internally. We have not had a chance yet to meet with the Senate committees who have taken on this, but we anticipate that we will shortly.
If a bill with last year's framework, it advances, lands on your desk, but it doesn't have a private right of action, I mean, just generally, would you support that?
Again, without looking at it, I wouldn't want to commit one way or the other.
The House has passed legislation that creates a litany of new property tax classifications for purposes of education taxes. Your general thoughts on that approach, Green?
Well, again, I don't mind having the conversation about that. I think tying it to this bill is problematic in a number of different ways. I'm not sure if the tax department can even implement these. I think it needs further work to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. But I don't mind having the conversation, but I don't think it should be put into law at this point. I think it should be studied further.
And conceptually, part of the idea is there are classes of property owners, second homes, vacation homes, that can afford to be chipping in more than they are right now Do you think that's true?
I don't know. I know the taxes I've heard that some of these second homeowners are paying now is $40,000-$50,000 a year for property taxes. I don't know. It's not whether they can afford it or not. It's whether they're going to continue to do it or not. So that's it's a balance as well. I don't want to take advantage of anybody.
All right, we'll switch over to the phones. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Go back to the room.
I have a few questions on the migrant worker issue, and perhaps maybe some of them are appropriate for Secretary Tebbetts. Secretary, the farm put out a statement after the news of the raid, or news of the enforcement action. It said something to the effect of, well, it said exactly, our employees were hired following the federal and state employment requirements. Can you speak a little bit to the extent to which the workers at many of these dairy farms are working legally, or whether they are working illegally?
I'm not really qualified. I'm not familiar with all the rules and regulations related. That statement came from the farm. Yeah. So I can do some research on that and get back to you. But I'm not familiar with the process that goes through that.
Okay. Can you speak more generally about the number of such workers in the state? I think that you just did a report recently about the size of this workforce in the state. I think maybe 750 to 850 workers and their families. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, there was a recent report called Dairy Delivers, Vermont Dairy Delivers, and in that looks at the issue, and some of the surveys that have been done was anywhere from 750 to 850 workers in dairy. There may be some more related to that. There could be family members, children, spouses, etc. But anywhere from 750 to 850 is sort of the estimate working in dairy. There could be others, foreign workers working in the other programs, the H-2A, H-2B visa programs, that would add more to that. But that's another program, and that's the seasonal program.
Right. Was there a statistic in that report, I recall, about the percentage of dairies in the state of Vermont that actually use workers who, I'm not sure if illegal is the right term, migrant workers at these farms? Like maybe north of 90% of the farms in the state maybe do have migrant workers working there. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, through some of the surveys, and this is more than just dairy as well. So we rely on a migrant workforce for the apple industry in Vermont. We rely on the vegetables. We rely on dairy. So it's much greater than just the dairy industry. And this has been in place for many, many years, and it's consistent across the country. So Vermont is just like New York has a big population of migrant workers that are on their farms. California, Texas. So it's an issue that's front and center of all of farmers across the country.
Do you know specifically whether the St. Pierre farm is going to be having any difficulty milking the cows that it has, with 8 of its workers now presumably not working today?
My understanding is the work is getting done at the farm, and that was one of the first things that we were all concerned about, to make sure that the health and safety of the workers, but also the health and safety of the animals. My understanding is the work is getting done.
And then last question would be if there's been any automation improvements in the state of Vermont that you're aware of. I think there have been some with new milking parlor technologies that maybe allow some of the work to get done with a smaller staff or fewer workers. Is that a trend in the state, or not so much?
Yeah, labor is probably one of the biggest issues facing agriculture right now, and that stems from very small farms. So some have turned to robotic milking to help with that labor shortage, and that could be one robot that's milking 60 or 70 cows. And this is a thing that it's not just the larger farms that are relying on migrant workforce. It could be smaller farms. Organic farms use migrant labor. Large farms, small farms, there may be 1 or 2 workers. Some may have several, like the case at Pleasant Valley.
The enforcement agency in this instance was CBP, not the same agency that's been responsible for some of the other controversial arrests and detentions that we've seen. I'm wondering to what extent that's noteworthy and to what extent it might alleviate concerns that this is part of a broader deportation strategy, coordinated strategy.
Yeah, I think an important factor that everyone should consider, it was Border Patrol. So Border Patrol, as I think the evidence is consistent, responded to a complaint. They went to the farm. So it doesn't appear that it was a pre-planned action that may have occurred in some cases that we hear about around the country related to maybe ICE. So I think the facts are consistent. They were responding to, that the two workers that they saw, and then it got to another level, which we're unclear of all those facts of what happened after that and why it led to, multiple people taken into custody. Thank you.
I have a question on the education package. I have not read it, of course. And I've heard you comment on a regular basis on the inability of people in the school to restrain, touch, isolate, expel, discipline, trouble when it breaks out in the classroom. Is that addressed at all?
I'm not sure it is addressed in this bill, but no, I don't believe
Is that all
it is.
set by the legislature, those policies?
I'm not sure who does that. I don't know if it's in statute or it's just in rules, or maybe it's done by the districts. I just don't know.
Looks like we have one more question online. Keith Whitcomb, Rowland Herald.
Hi, I was just wondering, has there been any serious conversation on how to reduce our reliance on foreign labor in agriculture? I mean, for one reason or another, it just seems like an enormous liability. Like if we somehow lost access to all these workers, sounds like we'd be in trouble. I don't know.
Yeah. Keith, I think the farms themselves have said if we could hire people here in the state without utilizing migrant workers, we probably would. As I said before, one or two farms had said they've been advocating, putting a lot of work into trying to attract someone to milk in the farms or work on the farms to no avail. They haven't received a single applicant after trying in different areas. So I think it's just a lack of interest in this industry, as well as I've spoken about for the last 9 years, the workforce that we need to rebuild, and it's not getting any better. I mean, as I said, in the last 10 years, we have 14,000 fewer kids under the age of 18 than we did before, and we're losing our workforce at the same time, 28,000 in the age group 40 to 55. So we're not moving in the right direction. That's why we've been continuing to advocate for more housing, more immediate housing, and as well trying to keep the costs, make it more affordable in Vermont. We're not going to get people to come here if we continue to tax them in a way that puts us out of competition with other states. So again, it's just a joint effort to try and attract more people into the state.
I think I heard somebody say the going rate for farm work is what, $16 an hour?
Well, this I know that the farms that I was in contact with had said that they start them at $16 an hour, plus housing on top of that they include. So it's 16 plus housing, plus other benefits, other bonuses for reaching different milestones.
Okay. I saw Burger King was offering a little over 17, but I don't know if housing was part of the deal. So
Probably not.
Probably not. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Governor, a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Last week we spoke a lot about the MOU that we have here in Vermont. with federal immigration officials, and you said that you were open to talking to lawmakers more about that MOU and restructuring it. Have you had any more conversation, and in particular, have you given any thought to the bill that they're trying to craft that, as I understand it, would somehow allow detentions of Vermonters so that Vermonters can stay here, but that would somehow exclude immigration officials from using the state as a place to detain people picked up in other states? That seems to be the approach that they're taking right now. How do you feel
Again,
about
I
that?
think it's going to complicate it further from my perspective. What if somebody comes across the border from Canada, for instance? Where do they detain them at that point, right? So it's, I think I understand what they're trying to do, but I just think they're going to further complicate it. It's going to make it more difficult to adhere to.
How do you expect to continue having conversations with lawmakers about the MOU and how it could be re-upped in August when a new one is signed?
Well, again, as I said, I think last week as well, I'm not sure that it's the best approach to not have a program here in Vermont. In fact, Mr. Madawi, I think himself, when he met with Senator Welch, had said he's getting treated well here. He's happy to be in Vermont and not in some other state in geographical proximity to where he has a home. So I'm just not sure if it's the right approach.
So at this point, if you had the opportunity to do another MOU with the federal government, would it likely look similar to the way it does now?
Possibly, but there might be, we might entertain doing some different things about the length of stay and when they were able to intake and outtake as well. I mean, there's some that's being done in the middle of the night or not on our schedule, so to speak. So that's been difficult for DOC to work on.
Making it more manageable for the state.
But there could be some things of that nature that can improve the contract.
So there was a cut in federal funding for charging stations, and it was taken out of the House, the T-bill in the House. Apparently they're trying to get it back in the Senate. Do you know what the prospects are for that? And if there isn't that federal funding for charging stations, what's that going to do to reaching our carbon reduction goals for transportation?
I might rely on Secretary Flynn or Secretary Moore because I'm not aware of the level of detail you're talking about in the T-bill.
Thank you, Governor. The issue right now with the electric vehicle charging funding has to do with the National Electric Vehicle Initiative, or NEVI. We had a press conference in Bradford about
Joe, you're on mute, I think, right now. You were good until about 6 words ago. Yeah. I think we've lost you completely. Did you get all that?
Now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. The funding that you're speaking of that's been paused, it hasn't been canceled. We're told that there's more guidance coming, but the funding that's been paused is the NEVI funding. That's the National Electric Vehicle Initiative funding. And right now, it has caused AOT to not go forward with intended infrastructure until we know what the new guidelines are going to be. We've been told through Secretary Duffy, the new Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, that those guidelines are coming. Part of the issue is, under 2JA and the Biden administration, about $5.5 billion was aimed toward this type of infrastructure. And only, I believe, 7 states put in a total of 66 charging stations. Now, Vermont was one of the first. We put in some. We had a press conference in Bradford. Some of you attended. So that's part of what this administration is looking at, is how are they going to change the guidance to get the states to do a bit more effort behind what the program intended. But that's the only piece at this time with respect to the transportation funding that's currently still paused. Everything else has been reopened.
Secretary Moore?
If I might add, sorry, 1 second. Just if I might add something, it's that there is also, I think, an issue around electric vehicle funding in the state budget. Last year, in addition to the NEVI funding that Secretary Flynn just spoke to, based on tracking our climate investments, there was about $6 million of other state funding that was invested in programs like Mileage Smart and Replace Your Ride, e-bike incentives, fleet incentives. The governor, through H289, which is our climate omnibus bill, proposed using some of the sort of above and beyond RGGI proceeds that Vermont has received over the last several years to continue to fund that work. I was in House Energy last week and reminding them that they haven't taken up those provisions, and so currently our overall state level investments in electric vehicles are slated to drop from about $6 million in state fiscal year 25 to just about $1.4 million this year, unless the legislature takes up the proposal in H289.
And if we're going to reduce our reliance on carbon fuels, we need more charging stations and we need faster charging stations. So it
Is
would.
the private sector doing much in Vermont with that, or is it really just a matter the state needs to make it happen?
I think there's a bit of both, but we need to participate.
We have been partnering with the private sector, so we would put out RFPs for the installation of these special chargers under the NEVI program, at least what I'm speaking about. And we would partner with companies. Norwich Technologies is a company that we partnered with in Bradford, Vermont. So they would bid on the installation and they would bid on the maintenance for that site over a period of time. And those costs are costs that were borne by this NEVI program. So it is the private sector. The state itself is not installing charging networks and then recouping costs for the electricity.
All right, thank you all very much.